Well, welcome to Sangha Night, more specifically, welcome to celebration of the Parinirvana. So this is one of number of festivals, traditional festivals within the kind of the year, the Buddhist year, and we're going to be spending the evening. I'm going to be talking a little bit, and then in amongst it, I'm going to have a number of readings from a text called the Parinirvana Sutta, which is a kind of full gathering together of the stories from the last days of the Buddha. So we'll be sort of referring to that, or that will be to the fore quite a bit of the evening. And then after we've had the talk and readings, we're going to have a 5-minute break, and then we're going to go into a visualization of the stupa. I'll say more about that when we get to that part of the evening. So what we're doing tonight, what we're marking here, is the reflecting, recalling the Parinirvana of the Buddha. So this is the death of the human being that had become a Buddha. And this festival is a real opportunity to turn towards the mystery of what it means to be completely free, and also the mystery of death itself. So we turn towards this, the mystery of liberation and the mystery of death. And it's not to heighten any difficulties that we might have with death itself, but really the festival is to bring out and to see with greater clarity this precious opportunity, this potential that we all have in the fact that we are in this human life. So it's really a celebration of this potential that we all have. So the first thing I want to try to do is just to get some understanding of this term Parinirvana. But to do that, I have to start with nirvana and then move on to Parinirvana. So unfortunately, the experience of nirvana is said to be beyond language and inexpressible. So that makes it somewhat difficult to proceed from this point. However, we can get an indication of the experience by or through the teachings of the Four Noble Truths, which we received from the Buddha. So we're told that nirvana is the direct experience of the complete eradication of suffering. And it's the natural result of unbinding from any clinging or aversion within our experience. So we come to see that through that unbinding, we get a real sense, a taste of the truth of interdependence, and that all experience, however fleeting or apparently permanent, is actually arising and passing, dependent on conditions. So one way we might understand the path of the Dharma leading to nirvana is a sense of a path that is developing our capacity to release from all our internal and external graspings or resistances, so that we can come to relax fully. And when we relax fully, this allows our responsive and spontaneous activity to flow, to arise quite naturally out of the clear wisdom of an unbound mind. So we might see nirvana, we might say that it's free of the conditioning factors of grasping or resisting. And the Buddha's path and the Buddha's example, he showed us how to achieve this for ourselves. He showed us that nirvana is actually always really close by and can be known right here in our own lives. And my belief is, my faith is, that actually we can all know that to some extent. In fact, we already do know that in our own lives already. I think that we all have these glimpses of the truth of nirvana. So hopefully we've all had those glimpses, we've tasted the natural ease that comes when there is no grip or resistance within our experience. And we might have noticed how when there is this ease that comes from letting go of the grip, something quite naturally seems to unfold within that experience. There's this sense of interconnectedness seems to quite naturally arise. And possibly even we might describe the experience of being in the presence of love. A love that seems to permeate or radiate through all sense experience. But these momentary glimpses that we have, they tend to be fleeting. And so the whole path of Buddhism, the whole path of practice, is to try to extend these beautiful glimpses by putting in conditions that tend to give rise to these experiences, so that eventually these glimpses become more and more meaningful and sustained for longer periods of time. And the culmination of that path of clear seeing, releasing and unbinding into this liberated state is referred to as nirvana. So nirvana is an embodied, ongoing experience of freedom that is attainable right here in this life. So that's nirvana. So we now come to what we mean by the Parinirvana. So the Parinirvana is the term for the completion of this liberating process. So the Buddha was the guide, he was the first treader of the way that led to nirvana, and yet he was still human. So like all of us, he had a body, and with that body came aging, illness and death. But the Parinirvana can be seen as that final letting go, the final release from the last vestiges of the effects of previous grasping at particular conditions signified by the fact there is a body, feelings, thoughts, volitions, and consciousness. So what happened in with nirvana is that the Buddha was no longer gripped or identified with any particular form or way of being. He was utterly at ease. So there was no generating any volitional directionality at death that would set up any future conditioning, future conditions. So the death of the Buddha, or the Parinirvana, is really a celebration of the ultimate liberation from conditions. Parinirvana is the final letting go, the final unbinding. And it reveals the goal of the Dharma in its fullness, in its completion. And this is why it's such a key festival for our community. It's really, we could say that Parinirvana Festival is the celebration of letting go. And this festival, importantly, it does point to the mystery of death. And it's this mystery, our relationship to it, that often influences, if not directly defines, how we live our individual lives. So death will be at the root of much of our grasping and resistance that's holding us back from nirvana. So our relationship to death may be really limiting our capacity to really fully live our life. It may be defining our choices, or its presence might be overshadowing our potential. On a more positive note, we can say that by discovering or being able to contemplate death, it's seen to be particularly helpful, because what it tends to do is that it seems to bring to the fore, bring to the surface those things that we really value. It kind of helps bring the urgency, or the spectre of death, our own death particularly. It seems to ensure that we really see what's important. We recognize, without having to think about it, what needs to be done, what needs to be said before it's too late. So in relation to this aspect of practice, we could say that a very positive aspect of death is that we can see it, we can describe the path, the spiritual life, as the embracing of small deaths. So what I mean by that is that when we let go of our cherished habits, when we discover that actually we don't need to hold on to a particular view, these are described as small deaths. It is a release. And I think it can be really helpful, really important, particularly in relation to this festival, that we can really notice where we're gripping in our lives. Ideas and views and preferences, interpretations of how things are or how things should be. These we tend to hold on to. We kind of coalesce our sense of a permanent state of being around these views and preferences. So a small death isn't a passivity to our experience. It's more that we open up, relax, release around these experiences, noticing how we're gripping, how we're holding them, and simply release, simply soften and loosen around those experiences. And what happens is, it seems to be that the more that we can do that, it seems to allow our interconnected lives to more easily flow, to discover our interconnectedness, our natural responsiveness, our empathic resonances with others. So we really, this experience, this festival tonight is actually pointing towards this perspective that we really have to allow ourselves to die, to allow new life to emerge through us. Our life needs death as much as we need air and water. So, in the spirit of this celebration of the mystery of death, we might want to ask, well, what happens to an enlightened being, a Buddha, after death? Seems a reasonable question. And during the Buddha's lifetime, this question was asked of him many times. So we're going to have the first reading now of a conversation. This will be by Dan, and it's a conversation that takes place with the Buddha when he's asked the question, what happens when a Buddha dies? So when you're ready, Dan, you may have to unmute.
Okay. The Buddha answers with another question. Anuradha, how do you conceive this? Is material form permanent or impermanent? Impermanent, Lord. Do you see material form as the Buddha? No, Lord. Do you conceive feelings, perception, volitions, or consciousness as permanent or impermanent? Impermanent, Lord. Then do you see any feelings, perception, volitions, or consciousness as the Buddha? No, Lord. Therefore, do you conceive the Buddha as no material form, feelings, perception, volitions, or consciousness? No, Lord. Anuradha, when a Buddha is here and now, unapprehendable, is it fitting to say after death, a Buddha is, or after death, a Buddha is not, or after death, a Buddha neither is or is not? No, Lord. The Buddha concludes by saying, what I describe and teach now as before is suffering and the cessation of suffering.
Great, thanks, Dan. So I'm hoping the screen share has gone off. Could you just let me know, Narvi, has the screen share gone off? Is it still on the...
It's gone now, Badger.
Okay. So we had that rather mysterious reading, and you may recognize it as having similarities with the Heart Sutra, which we often recite in the context of these classes. So the Buddha is saying that the Parinirvana is unapprehendable, inconceivable. It's beyond rational thought. So it's a bit like the taste of sugar or the taste of salt can't be communicated and directly known through concepts. He says, the Buddha said, these questions about the nature of a Buddha aren't helpful to us right here, between our own birth and our own death. The Buddha's really not interested in debating metaphysics or abstract ideas for their own sake. All the Buddha's teachings, all the Buddha's actions are there. The Dharma itself is there. They are strategies to alleviate suffering, alleviate our own suffering, the suffering of anyone that the Buddha meets. And the Buddha simply tells us, attend to your experience and discover here and now why in this cycle of life and death you are suffering. And the Buddha also points to the means to end that suffering by putting down clinging or aversion, by putting down attachment to any particular form of being or form of non-being, any clinging to views, habits of mind, and particular activities. So as I've already said, but I'll say it again, the Parinirvana is this natural full and final expression of that grip being completely released. It's the culmination, the fruit of the thorough engagement and investigation into this fleeting, precious life, made by a human being just like us, a human being that had found the means to utterly let go of clinging. So I've said a bit about this term Parinirvana, and it may be that possibly this particular year, this festival might feel even more pertinent to us. It won't have gone without notice that death is endlessly at the fore, with most of the news outlets around us endlessly talking about the pandemic. And our society is being bombarded with images and narratives creating anxiety about death from COVID. And we know our government and scientists are struggling to find ways to avoid us dying. And yet over 100,000 people have now died in the UK as a consequence of this virus. So quite reasonably, we're having to adapt the functions of our society to minimize the risk of death to those who are vulnerable. And not only to protect them, but also trying to protect the organizations that tend to our recovery from sickness and disease. And those same organizations that also tend to our dying. And behind that, almost hidden, we have the climate emergency and the death of so many species and habitats. And our current ways of living and working are also being challenged, even killed off by the urgent need to decrease our harmful impact on a rapidly changing environment. So I mention this because I know for myself that this situation that we find ourselves in right now provokes quite a lot of underlying stress and anxiety in me. It's almost like a background hum to my experience. And I know many people are suffering in the same way, either because of concerns for themselves or for people close to them. And unfortunately, there are, even within this Sangha, some of us have experienced the death of a loved one, a death of a close friend, a death of just somebody that we have been around, that we've come into contact with. So these are difficult times, painful times for many of us. And so collectively we can sense that death is very present. And there may be amongst that, within it, a real longing to return to some normal life. But what is that? What was that fantasy, the normal life? It may have been a life of comfort and ease and distraction, a life of permanent good health, easy wealth, and perhaps most importantly, a life without death. So this is one reason why the Parinirvana festival is so important. It's actually to wake us up and remind us that death is actually always here amongst us, always alongside us. Before the pandemic and the climate emergency, people were still dying. According to the government's Office of Births and Deaths, in 2019, there were 707,000 deaths just in the UK. So it's likely in this coming year that just on this small island, over 600,000 of us will be dying. And in 80 years or less, everyone here on this screen will be dead. Anyway, we're not gathered here to be morbid. I think it's we're actually here because we are involved in a Buddhist training, and the training is the training in letting go, unbinding, softening our preferences to what should be present in our experience and how our life should be. And what we've been invited to do instead is to really attend to what is actually arising all around and within us. And attending to those experiences with real care and sensitivity, so that we can really feel our aliveness, and we can really feel those opportunities for the small deaths, so that we can embody and express the care that we have for ourselves and each other and the world. Without this precious sense of death, our own mortality, we may lose touch with the fragility of this precious world, the fragility of our own life. So we might return to finding ourselves drifting and postponing or avoiding fully living. And once we lose that urgency to engage in the training, it makes it very hard to notice and discover those opportunities for small deaths that lead us towards freedom. So this year, we're looking at the 5 spiritual faculties, as you know, and I'm going to take this opportunity just to weave a couple of those faculties into this evening, because what we're doing is we're suggesting that these faculties, the 5 spiritual faculties, are a real foundation to build resilience in the face of such challenging times. So I'm going to be focusing this week on faith and wisdom. And I think my understanding is that over the next couple of weeks, Parinirvana will be, as Surya Daya said, will be leading through these 2 sessions on meditation. So I'm sure he'll be looking at concentration and energy. And hopefully we know by now that mindfulness underpins all of these faculties. And it also underpins all the stories from the last days of the Buddha. But we're going to turn now to the stories of the last days. So this first episode comes from the Buddha's final tour. He set off on his final tour about 3 months before the Parinirvana. He recognizes, he understands that he is dying. And so he's traveling from place to place, sharing the Dharma, ensuring that everybody is clear on the teachings so that he can let go. And he comes to a settlement called Nardika. and he's been there many times, and he's amassed many followers living in that area. So on this final visit, he's staying in what's called the Brick Hall. So it suggests quite a substantial building has been set aside for his accommodation and for his teaching. And they've arrived, they being the Buddha and Ananda, his constant companion. And Ananda has been out and about talking to various followers, and he comes back to the Buddha, recounting many of the conversations that he's had with the various individuals that he's met as he was walking around Nardika. And what he recounts to the Buddha, he said, well, there's many individuals have died since they last visited, visited Nardika. And the followers of the Buddha wants to know from the Buddha what's happened to each one of them that has died, what realm they've been born into, how they are faring after death. So this is the Buddha's reply. So this is the second reading, which will be read by Nigel, and it's called The Mirror of the Dharma.
The mirror of the Dharma. But truly, Ananda, it is nothing strange that human beings should die. But if each time it happens, you should come to the Buddha and ask about them in this manner, indeed it would be troublesome to him. Therefore, Ananda, I will give you the teaching called the mirror of the Dharma, possessing which the noble disciples, should they desire, can declare of themselves, there is no more rebirth for me in hell, nor as an animal or ghost, nor in any realm of woe. Extreme enterer am I, safe from falling into the states of misery. Assured am I and bound for nirvana. And what, Ananda, is that teaching called the mirror of the Dharma, possessing which the noble disciple may declare thus of themselves? In this case, Ananda, the noble disciple possesses unwavering faith in the Buddha thus. The Blessed One is the fully enlightened one, perfect in knowledge and conduct, the happy one, the knower of the world, the paramount trainer of beings, the teacher of gods and humans, the enlightened one, the Blessed One. They possess unwavering faith in the Dharma thus. Well propounded by the Blessed One is the Dharma, evident, timeless, inviting investigation, leading to emancipation, to be comprehended by the wise, each for themselves. They possess unwavering faith in the Blessed One's order of disciples thus. The Blessed One's order of disciples is worthy of honor, of hospitality, of offerings, of veneration, the supreme field for meritorious deeds in this world. Their virtues are dear to the noble ones, complete and liberating, praised by the wise, uninfluenced by worldly concerns, and favorable to concentration of mind. This, Ananda, is the teaching called the mirror of the Dharma, whereby the noble disciples may thus know of themselves. There is no more rebirth for me in hell, nor as an animal or ghost, nor in any realm of woe. A stream enterer am I, safe from falling into the states of misery. Assured am I and bound for enlightenment.
Thank you, Nigel. So you can see here the mirror of the Dharma is discussing Buddhist faith. This is the faith in the three jewels, which we mark at the start of each evening. So we're looking to the mirror of the Dharma to support our life, to support our small deaths, and as importantly, to support the letting go. So I'm just going to give you briefly an example from my own life. So December the 27th, 2001, I've been called to a hospital in Suffolk, where I'm told my father is seriously ill. I discover that he's got a serious brain hemorrhage, and he's now on a life support system because his brain has been so overwhelmed by the bleed. And we have to decide as a family whether or not to switch off the life support system that he's relying on. And we decide that that is the only course of action that would be fair for him. So later in that afternoon, we asked the hospital to turn everything off. So my father is unconscious, and I can still feel he's very much present with us as we sit around the bed with him. And there was 4 of us sitting around the bed, and we kind of wrongly imagined that once the machinery was all turned off, that his death would be fairly quick. But actually his survival instinct continued to help him find breath and keep his heart pumping. And this continued into the late evening. And during that time, I just really wanted to chant with him. I felt I wanted to do that to support him as he died. I talked to my family, and they seemed, well, they said they were very happy for this to happen. Because my father was actually, he'd been involved in a Zen tradition for many years, but also all the family and my father had been at my ordination in the previous year. And in the final year we had together, he was always really keen and eager to know how my Buddhist life was going. And this last year was very important for building a connection with him, which for many reasons we'd failed to create prior to that final year. So I was sitting with him and beginning to chant, started off with the Green Tara mantra, and then later moved on to the long Vajrasattva mantra, which is particularly associated with protection and support for the dying process. But as I went on chanting, I began to have real doubts what I was doing. My family was coming in and going out for a bit of food or a bit of rest, a smoke, and I was sitting there chanting. And I began to wonder, who is this gibberish for? Is it to help me? Is it so that I can avoid feeling the tragedy of this situation? Is it that I wanted to avoid feeling that there was something left unsaid? What did I need to say to him? What did I need to hear? And was I imagining these figures symbolized by the mantras were some form of protective gods? And if so, did I really believe in their presence? And these thoughts were swirling around with me as I was just sitting there with my father, listening to his long laboured breaths. And all I could really do for him was occasionally moisten his lips with a cotton swab of water to decrease the discomfort of the breath in the mouth. But I could chant for him. So a strong thought came to me. Either I need to do this fully for him and trust that it's of value, or I need to stop now and recognize that I have no sustaining faith in Buddhism, in the path of the Dharma, and look elsewhere for a path. So I saw it as a real pivotal moment for myself and for my father. So I'm still here. I did make that choice. I made the choice to continue. And as the night wore on, the space between his breaths became longer and longer. And then those of you who have sat with a dying person, the breaths change as they approach death. I continued to chant quietly with him, and the breaths finally stopped. My family began crying and quickly left, and the nurses came in to confirm his death. And yet, for me, I still felt his presence and felt a strong need to continue with the mantra. So I just sat with him. I got some space from the nurses, asked just to continue. I sat with them and continued with the mantra. And whenever I felt there was a sense of confusion, like a shimmer of energy in the room. And so I stopped chanting and just told my father that he was dead, that he had died, and that there was no need to fear. And this happened a few times. And then after a while, I knew that he was gone. The body was still there, but my father had gone. And I felt then free to leave. And I felt leaving the hospital a sense of real love and relief rather than any sense of grief. I felt real good fortune to have been able to sit with my father and support him in his death. And I felt a good fortune to find faith in the presence of Vajrasattva. So 20 years on, I still have my periods of doubt. They still wash through me, and yet I'm still here testing my faith in the Dharma. I do know I have faith in the three jewels, and I do know I am blessed by them. So faith for me is primarily this faith in letting go and letting in. And faith is always in relation to wisdom. So there's much that could be said about wisdom. In a way, it's the vast wealth of the teachings given to us by the Buddha. But I'll just briefly give you the teachings of the Four Noble Truths, which is where I started really. But I think it's just worthy of revisiting. So this is again from the last days of the Buddha. So on this occasion, the Buddha has moved to a place called Kotigama. And there again, there was a large company of followers surrounding him. And the Buddha addresses them saying, "It is through not realizing, through not penetrating the Four Noble Truths, that this long course of birth and death has been passed through and undergone by me as well as by you." And what are these four? They are the noble truth of suffering, the noble truth of the origin of suffering, and the noble truth of the cessation of suffering, and the noble truth of the way to the cessation of suffering. But now, followers, now that these have been realized and penetrated, cut off is the craving for existence. Destroyed is that which leads to renewed becoming. There is no fresh becoming. And thus it was said by the Blessed One, the Happy One, the Master. Through not seeing the Four Noble Truths, long was the weary path from birth to birth. But when these are known, removed is rebirth's cause, the root of sorrow plucked out. There ends rebirth. So we need faith in the three jewels, the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, that creates this compass for our life, that creates a direction and a path. But we also need this wisdom to really look fully at our life, to look at the causes of suffering within our experience, to really look deeply into the small moments of grip that are creating suffering and find a way to relax and unbind in the moment. And through these, we can fully dive into the potential of our life, pointed to by the Buddha. So I'm going to end now, or I'm not going to end. I'm going to invite 3 more readings from the life of the last days of the Buddha. So I invite you just to listen, and I've got some words beginning with Ross talking about the Buddha's last meal.
So the Buddha's last meal. And Kunda, the metal worker, came to know. The Blessed One, they say, has arrived at Pava and is staying in my mango grove. And he went to the Blessed One, and having respectfully greeted him, sat down at one side. And the Blessed One instructed Kunda, the metal worker, in the Dharma, and roused, edified, and gladdened him. Then Kunda spoke to the Blessed One, saying, May the Blessed One, O Lord, please accept my invitation for tomorrow's meal, together with the community of bhikkhus. And by his silence, the Blessed One consented. Sure then of the Blessed One's consent, Kunda the metal worker rose from his seat, respectfully saluted the Blessed One, and keeping his right side towards him, took his departure. And Kunda the metal worker, after the night had passed, had choice food, hard and soft, prepared in his abode, together with a quantity of sukkara madava, and announced it to the Blessed One, saying, It is time, O Lord, the meal is ready. Thereupon the Blessed One, in the forenoon, having got ready, took bowl and robe and went with the community of bhikkhus to the house of Kunda, and there sat down on the seat prepared for him. And he spoke to Kunda, saying, With a sukkara madava you have prepared, Kunda. You may serve me. With the other food, hard and soft, you may serve the community of bhikkhus. So be it, Lord. And with a sukkara madava prepared by him, he served the Blessed One. With the other food, hard and soft, he served the community of bhikkhus. Thereafter, the Blessed One spoke to Kunda, saying, Whatever, Kunda, is left over of the sukkara madava, bury that in a pit, for I do not see in all this world, with its gods, Maras and Brahmas, among the host of ascetics and Brahmins, gods and men, anyone who could eat it, and entirely digest it except the Buddha alone. And Kunda the metal worker answered the Blessed One, saying, "So be it, O Lord." And what remained over of the Sukara Madhava he buried in a pit. Then he returned to the Blessed One and respectfully greeted him, and sat down at one side, and the Blessed One instructed Kunda the metal worker in the Dharma, and roused and edified and gladdened him. After this he rose from his seat and departed. And soon after the Blessed One had eaten the meal provided by Kunda, the metal worker, a dire sickness fell upon him, even dysentery, and he suffered sharp and deadly pains. But the Blessed One endured them mindfully, clearly comprehending and unperturbed. Then the Blessed One spoke to the Venerable Ananda, saying, "Come, Ananda, let us go to Kusinara." And the Venerable Ananda answered, "So be it, Lord."
Thank you, Ross. Now we come to Yasmin, the reading about the last place of rest.
Last place of rest. The Blessed One, together with a large company of bhikkhus, went to the further bank of the river Hiranavati, to the Sala Grove of the Malas, in the vicinity of Kusinara. And there he spoke to the Venerable Ananda, saying, "Please, Ananda, prepare for me a couch between the twin Sala trees, with the head to the north. I am weary, Ananda, and want to lie down." "So be it, Lord." And the Venerable Ananda did as the Blessed One asked him to do. Then the Blessed One lay down on his right side in the lion's posture, resting one foot upon the other, and so disposed himself, mindfully and clearly comprehending. At that time the twin Sala trees broke out in full bloom, though it was not the season of flowering. And the blossoms rained upon the body of the Buddha, and dropped and scattered, and were strewn upon it in worship of the Buddha. And celestial mandarava flowers and heavenly sandalwood powder from the sky rained down upon the body of the Buddha, and dropped and scattered, and were strewn upon it in worship of the Buddha. And the sound of heavenly voices and heavenly instruments made music in the air out of reverence for the Buddha. And the Blessed One spoke to the Venerable Ananda, saying, "Ananda, the twin Sala trees are in full bloom, though it is not the season of flowering. And the blossoms rain upon the body of the Buddha, and drop and scatter, and are strewn upon it in worship of the Buddha. And celestial coral flowers and heavenly sandalwood powder from the sky rain down upon the body of the Buddha, and drop and scatter, and are strewn upon it in worship of the Buddha. And the sound of heavenly voices and heavenly instruments makes music in the air out of reverence for the Buddha. Yet it is not thus, Ananda, that the Buddha is respected, venerated, esteemed, worshipped, and honoured in the highest degree. But, Ananda, whatever follower abides by the Dharma, lives uprightly in the Dharma, walks in the way of the Dharma, it is by such a one that the Buddha is respected, venerated, esteemed, worshipped, and honoured in the highest degree. Therefore, Ananda, thus should you train yourselves. We shall abide by the Dharma, live uprightly in the Dharma, walk in the way of the Dharma."
Thank you, Yasmin. So our final reading is Ananda's grief and the Buddha's last words, read by Esme.
And the Buddha spoke to the followers, saying, "Where is Ananda?" "The Venerable Ananda, Lord, has gone into the vihara, and there stands leaning against the doorpost and weeping, 'I am still but a learner, and still have to strive for my own perfection. But alas, my master, who was so compassionate towards me, is about to pass away.'" Then the Blessed One asked them to bring the Venerable Ananda to him. They went and spoke to the Venerable Ananda as the Blessed One had asked him to. And the Venerable Ananda went to the Blessed One, bowed down to him, and sat on one side. Then the Buddha spoke to the Venerable Ananda, saying, Enough, Ananda, do not grieve, do not lament, for have I not taught from the very beginning that with all that is dear and beloved there must be change, separation, and severance? Of that which is born, come into being, compounded, and subject to decay, how can one say, may it not come to dissolution? There can be no such state of things. Now, for a long time, Ananda, you have served the Buddha with loving kindness in deed, word, and thought, graciously, pleasantly, with a whole heart and beyond measure. Great good have you gathered, Ananda. Now you should put forth energy, and soon you too will be free. The Blessed One addressed his followers, saying, Behold now, I exhort you. All compounded things are subject to ceaseless change. Strive for awakening and wisdom with care. These were the last words of the Buddha.